So, hi, Brian. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
My pleasure.
So, Brian Kennedy is the director and professor at the Center for Healthy Aging at the National University of Singapore, and is also the chief scientific officer of Ponce de Leon Health, which is the company behind Rejuvenate, a supplement designed to promote healthy aging. So, in 2011, you conducted a study on the effects of Rejuvenant, which you were able to find that it decreased biological age. So, could you explain your key findings and why you believe that Rejuvenant has such a huge impact on biological aging?
Yeah, sure. It was actually 2021, but
Yep,
yeah.
sorry about that. 2021.
Um, yeah, so in a way, that study was not optimal because we used consumers of the product for the study. We didn't do a double-blinded placebo-controlled study. And we're doing that now here at National University of Singapore using the time release AKG or life AKG. But I think what was interesting about that study is that it was one of the first ones that showed that a small molecule, in this case a supplement, could influence biologic aging using one of the DNA methylation tests that is now considered clocks for how fast you're aging. And so in that case, there were about 42 people that were buying the product and they were willing to do a DNA methylation test at baseline and then again an average of 7 months later. And what we found is that those people on average got about 7 years younger for biologic age in that time window. Now,
Wow.
let me first say that, as I said, there was no placebo control, and I do believe there's a placebo effect on biologic aging.
Hmm.
If you're paying $100 a month for a product that, you think makes you younger, you're probably younger by a little bit, not by 7 years. So what we speculate is that there are effects of the supplement that are actually altering biologic age, and that's consistent with our animal data that AKG improves health span and to some extent lifespan in mice. I think that we're really excited about that, and we're now going back and trying to do more controlled studies to determine whether we can really validate that in other contexts and other ethnicities and other regions of the world, etc.
Wow. So, do you think, after you guys work on these tests and with the control, do you think that everybody should be taking Rejuvenant? And what do you think the future of this looks like?
Well, first of all, I'm not unbiased. I'm involved with the company, so I should disclose that, as you mentioned. Um, I've been taking this product a while. I think that a lot of people have been taking it, and we get all kinds of reports of the benefits. I think that it really comes down to where you are in how you want to deal with your aging process. If you want to wait until something is fully validated, I don't think there's any intervention would fall under that context except maybe exercise and not eating too many calories, etc. Um,
Hmm.
I don't think any of the supplements and drugs are fully validated. Um, on the other hand, things like AKG are very safe. Uh, it's on the generally regarded as safe list by U.S. government, and so I think there's very little risk in taking things like that. And if you want to be more on the cutting edge and say, I like where that data is and I think it's worth doing, then I think that's reasonable too. I think one of the things that I'm really pushing now is that it's very important to put decision making as much as possible back in the hands of the consumer or the individual. Uh, when you need to do sick care, when you have some disease, then doctors have to make decisions or at least strongly suggest decisions. But when doctors are making decisions for your wellness, the problem is that, the compliance rate is extremely low. We tell people what to do, and most people don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think what a better approach is to empower the individual to make their own decision. And some people are like, I want to try this, it's safe, I want to go out and do it. I think that's great. Other people are like, I want to see all the data before I make a decision. That's fine too. And so, I think that that's kind of where I am on it. I'd like to have people sort of, in an ideal world, I want to see people getting educated about healthy longevity and then making their own choices for sustainable strategies to try to get there.
Okay. So, you said maybe not everybody is wanting to take right now Rejuvenant. So, if they want to, lower their biological age and work on their longevity, what dietary and lifestyle steps do you think that they should do to support this?
Yeah, by the way, I'm happy if people take these people. But I think that there's a lot of debate on nutrition and aging. So if we start there, the one thing that I think almost everyone can agree on is that on average, especially Americans, are eating way too many calories.
Yeah.
The recommended calorie intake for someone my size, I'm about 6 feet, weight is 2,200 calories a day. If I'm the average American, I'm eating 500 calories a day, and that's a problem for sure. And we
Yeah.
know that obesity and things like that accelerate aging. And so I think keeping your caloric intake down to something reasonable is the first place to start. Secondarily, there's a lot of debate over whether you should have a keto diet or vegetarian diet or
Mhm.
milkshake diet or whatever else. And I kind of come down on the side of saying try to have a balanced diet which balances your macronutrients. I'm not I think things like keto diets help you lose weight, but in the long term, I'm not sure how healthy that is.
Yeah.
And so, if you can balance your proteins, your fats, and your carbohydrates and try to minimize processed sugars, I think that's great. In addition to that, I think there's significant amount of data that too much red meat consumption, too much dairy consumption are accelerating facets of aging. So try to keep that to something reasonable. I think that if I tell people to go be vegan marathon runners, they're not going to listen. The question is, how do you do lifestyle change in a sustainable way that people can live with on a long-term basis? Because anything they do to their diet for 2 months and stop is unlikely to have a huge benefit in the long term. So it
Mhm.
has to be sustainable changes. But exercise is the same way. Ideally people are doing, cardiovascular exercise 3 to 5 times a week and combining that with some resistance training. That's probably too much for most people. They don't have time
Mhm.
to put that into their lifestyle. It's too much for me. I do as much as I can, but I don't get to that level very often. And so finding sustainable ways to get exercise into your life is important. And maybe that's walking home from work. It doesn't have to be extreme, but it needs to be sustained. And I think that's the most important.
Got it. So balance and sustainability, good for longevity.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
there's also stress, and that's a
Yeah,
long distance. And there's also sleep, another important factor. So all of
definitely.
these lifestyle modifications will, on average, help people as they age. And the more of them they can incorporate, the more changes they can incorporate that improve those facets are probably the better they'll do.
So, in your study, did people change anything regarding their diet, their sleep, their stress levels, or were you focused more on only what the supplement did for them?
Well, we were trying to focus on what the supplement did, but that's
Mhm.
always a challenge in clinical studies. Even in placebo-controlled studies, that's one of the reasons I think you have a placebo effect is that if somebody signs up for a study, they come into the clinic and they get assessed for aging, they get interested in aging and they start reading about aging, and then you tell them don't change anything, but people change things, and so they might start exercising more, they may change their diet. So hopefully that balances out between the placebo group and the intervention group, but this is always a challenge for clinical studies. People change what they're doing, how they act, they get educated in some area, and so you have to fight that battle all the time.
So, looking ahead, what do you think the next big breakthroughs will be in the field of aging, maybe over the next decade?
Well, I think the first thing, and hopefully this happens with the AKG, is that we really, and in better controlled studies, can validate that these things are impacting biologic age. I think
Hmm.
that's going to happen in the next few years. There are dozens of potential small molecules that could have this effect. Um, I don't think anybody knows which one's going to work best, but I think some of them will work. Everybody has their opinions, but the data in humans is still limited. I think a next step is to start to understand which things work in which people. How do we
Hmm.
personalize these interventions in a way that maximizes their impact? And right now, I don't think we know how to do that. Another question is how do we combine interventions together? There are people out there that are advocating taking 20 different interventions a day. And I can say right now that if you do that in a mouse, you're not going to get a positive outcome. In fact, when we mix two or three things together, we often see that they cancel each other out
Really?
and you
Wow.
lose the benefits. So this assumption that if A is good and B is good and C is good, that A plus B plus C is going to be great is there's no data to support that. Occasionally it happens, but it also just as often happens that you lose the benefits of A, B, and C. And so I think that there's still a lot of misinformation out there. And I'm perfectly supportive of hackers that want to do whatever they want. They want to educate themselves and try things, that's fine. But I don't want those people to be out there advocating strategies to the general population that are not tested yet. And I think this sort of combinational stuff is right now not tested. So if you see a company that's selling a pill with six different things in it, I think the next question is, have they done clinical testing on that pill with those six things, and can they show a benefit from it? Because it's not enough to say that, the ingredients in those pills individually are doing some benefit. What you really need to know in that case is if you combine it together in that way, is there a benefit?
Hmm. So, you mentioned that you guys were testing with animals and mice specifically. So, what are some challenges that you face when translating those findings from animals to human trials in longevity research?
We actually do yeast, worms, flies, killifish, and mice. So we have a whole system, basically a small zoo of non-human research. But and we use them for so like in things like yeast and worms, we can go very fast, screen lots of things very cheaply and very quickly. And mice are very expensive,
Hmm.
and the studies are a minimum of 8 months. So anytime you test an intervention, it takes a long time. Um, I think there's a perception out there right now that mice have not proven to be a great model for disease research in humans. So, in other words, take a disease like Alzheimer's. A lot of the things that work in mice then don't translate to humans. But I think
Really?
that aging will translate a whole lot better. And this is a hypothesis, okay? I don't know that all the data is in to support this.
Mhm.
But the reason I believe that is because when you create a disease model in mice, the traditional way has been to take human mutations, put them in the mice, induce some phenotype like plaques in their brain. And then they often do that in young mice. And so you're looking at 4 to 8 month old mice to study Alzheimer's disease. And the problem with that is that number one, mice don't get those phenotypes naturally. So it's an artificial situation. And number two, it's young mice compared to old humans. And so then you get some drug that works in young animals, and then in a human clinical trial, it doesn't work. And I think there are all kinds of differences that happen with aging, drug efflux, all kinds of, uh, biology changes with aging that could impact whether things work or not. So, but when you're looking at aging, you're taking a normal aging mouse and comparing that to a normal aging human. And so I think that there's certainly differences, okay, but I think the fundamental processes, what we've learned that drive the aging process, are very similar across species. And even to the point, that some of the major pathways that affect aging, the sirtuins, the TOR pathway, these things were insulin, IGF, these things were found in things like in worms and flies initially, and then later shown to be true in mice and humans. So um, I think there's going to be a lot of conservation looking at aging across species. And we still need animals. It's nice to say that we're going to have AI models for disease and we won't need to do animal research. And I hope we get there someday. But right
Yeah.
now we're not there. So we still need animals at the moment.
Okay. So, how do you guys like specifically track people's biological age, and what role do you think that the biological age plays on people's actual lifespan and health span as well?
Yeah, I think that those are great questions. We mentioned that not the interventions have not been fully tested in humans yet, and I would say the
Mhm.
same thing about the biomarkers. To me, they're very promising as measuring biologic age, and we use them in research all the time. And people can send their blood, saliva, stool, something in and get their own biologic age measured by companies now. And I encourage people to do that because I think it's interesting information, but it's not fully validated. I don't want to mislead people to say that any test is a full measure of biologic age at this moment. Um, and so this is emerging science. So you can do things like DNA methylation. You can look at transcriptomics or proteomics or any kind of omics, basically. We just published a clock that measures biologic age based on clinical chemistries. And we really like this paper because, of course, it's ours. But we really like this paper because it can calculate biologic age based on clinical measures that people take in the doctor's office and the hospital all the time. LDL, inflammatory factors, questionnaires, medical records. And this is a more actionable clock than DNA methylation. If you go into the doctor's office and say, oh, these 13 DNA methylation sites tell me I'm 10 years too old, the doctor's going to say, I don't know what that means. I don't know. This clock isn't validated. These methylation sites, I don't know what pathways they're affecting. How
Mhm.
do I act on that? There's nothing actionable. But if you go and say, my clinical chemistry clock is telling me I'm too old, and it's because I have subtle changes in my metabolism measuring markers that clinicians look at all the time, then they can take action on that. They can say, well, let's try to realign your metabolism either with lifestyle or with drugs, or let's
Mhm.
deal with the inflammation that you have that we didn't know about. And then when that happens, hopefully their biologic age is getting younger again. So we're excited about that clock. I think the question of what does biologic age really mean is a fascinating question. And one of the reasons for that is that, chronologic age just goes up, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at these biologic age measures, they're oscillating around some point. So that it's going up generally, but people from 2 months apart may be biologically younger 2 months later, and then a little older again, and then younger. And so what we know is that this is being influenced by things like COVID, viral infections. It's being influenced by lifestyle changes, all kinds of other things. So it's oscillating around some point. And so I think that that's really fascinating. It may
Mhm.
be that the general trajectory is a marker of damage that's driving the aging process, but the oscillations are a marker of how your body's reacting to the level of damage you have. And that's influenced by all these lifestyle things we've talked about, maybe supplements. So I think we need more research to understand that, but um, we're really excited about these biologic aging clocks. I think they're really revolutionized the field.
Yes, definitely. So, do you think that in the future, when maybe more people are taking supplements such as Rejuvenant, people are going to start to live much longer and maybe, increase their age by decades?
I think people will be healthy longer. I'm confident of
Okay.
that. I think that the question of whether maximum lifespan goes up is still an open question. So that
Mhm.
the average lifespan, I think, will go up somewhat, maybe 5 to 10 years. What you make it though is a squaring of the curve. So people stay healthy and get closer to their maximum lifespan, which is great, by the way, if that happens. but the question of whether maximum lifespan grows up is still an open one. And it may well be that the strategies to get you to 150 or 200 years are different than the ones we've developed so far. Uh, and so we're going back to basic science with some collaborators and trying to say if we're really talking about is it possible to dramatically slow aging? Is it possible to stop aging? Is it possible to reverse aging? I think these are fascinating questions that are still at the level of basic biology. But
Mhm.
I want to go back. Even if we could just extend health span by 5 years in the population, that's a huge medical big victory. It saves more money than curing all cancer in people over 50. So it's even small, what you might perceive as small changes are actually revolutionary changes. But I think you're right. It's a fascinating question. Can we really, can we stop aging? I don't think we know the answer right
Yeah, well, that would be really incredible to find out, and I think that, you know, Rejuven and supplements that you're working with can definitely make that happen. So, what longevity practices do you personally follow? I know that you take the supplement, and what else do you do that you think is helping you personally?
I've kind of become an experimental organism. So I've tried a lot of different things. I try them one at a time. I don't mix six things together. I mix
Mhm.
at most two. So that's one comment. And I've tried a lot of supplements, a couple of repurposed drugs, and some other things. Um, I don't advocate for especially the drugs because you know that this should be done by a doctor through prescribed medicine. And so, you know, if you're interested in those kind of things, you should go see a clinician, which I'm not, by the way. I'm a PhD, not an MD. And but I also somewhat as seriously as I can, I take lifestyle seriously. So I'm a runner. I try to run at least 2 or 3 times a week. I try to go to the gym when I can. I try to eat only one big meal a day, although that's kind of difficult when you're traveling as much as I do. And I think I really try to be cognizant of my stress. You know, mindfulness, you know, has been a hard thing to prove because it's difficult to test in animal models. But I think that the value of mindfulness in aging is pretty clear. And I don't think it matters how you get there. You can do yoga, you can do other things. Like I get it when I'm doing long runs, kind of. But I think that clearing your mind and really trying to understand how stressed you are at a moment is very important. I mean, we see so many people in our lives that you can look at them and you realize how stressed they are.
Yeah.
But they don't realize it. They think it's just normal everyday practice. And
Mm.
having that level of stress all the time is psychological stress is really, I think, accelerating aging. So you know, people live in all kinds of stressful environments, but processing that and not feeling, trying to reduce the amount of stress you feel, I think is very
Wow. So, Brian, thank you so much. Everything that you said was truly incredible. I know that you're a very busy guy, so I'm gonna let you go. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming to speak with me, and wow, just everything that you're doing sounds amazing, and you're creating the future for longevity. So that is really
I
incredible.
hope so.
Yes. I think so at least. But, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Of course.